When I bought my house, it came with quite a few surprises. The wiring was ancient and I found asbestos. But one day I discovered something even creepier, a secret room that shouldn't exist. The home inspection turned up some pretty interesting things, like how all of the electrical wiring in the place was original to the 1940s. And don't get me started on the amount of asbestos lurking in the walls. But the inspector didn't pick up on anything too sinister. As far as houses go, mine is pretty average. Nothing special. But when I moved in, I had no idea what to expect. I knew the house was old, so I wasn't shocked when I turned up more asbestos after I moved in. What surprised me was how much there was. I'm not talking about the small patch in the basement that I had expected. They were just as surprised by the extent of the damage as I was. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what else might be hiding in the house. In the kitchen, I flicked on the light and gasped. The sink was hanging off the counter and lying at an angle. Ow! This was impossible. I had checked it less than 24 hours earlier and it was fine. The fibers can be released into the air and inhaled if the material that contains them is disturbed or broken. And when I touched it, it felt hollow. I pushed the backsplash and it popped off, revealing a dark hole behind it. But as long as everything stayed intact, I should be fine. And as soon as they realized the house was full of it, they got to work tearing down the walls. The hole was definitely man-made. Someone had made it with a chisel or a hammer. But why? I told myself it was a cat, but I knew it wasn't. This time I called an exterminator. And when he saw what I had found, his eyes widened in surprise, but he promised to take care of it. So he put on a protective suit and grabbed a shovel. When he came out of the wall, he was covered in dirt and his face was pale. "Get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. Now, then he crawled through the hole in the wall and disappeared. "Holy smokes," he whispered. "That's unbelievable." We measured the wall, and then he marked it with a pencil. "I'll get right to work," he said, and then he got out his hammer and started making a hole in the wall. Cats don't have yellow eyes. Not that I know of, anyway. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed he was freaked out by what he had seen. But later, when I went back to check on the hole, I realized he hadn't fixed it. He had simply boarded it up with scrap wood. I was trapped in a dark, dank room with no way out. And whatever it was definitely hiding in my kitchen. I walked around the kitchen trying to find another angle, but it was no use. And you're inside my house. I knew I had to do something, so I called a contractor. The entrance was completely hidden, and there was no way I was getting in there. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get back to work." He had pale skin and his eyes were glowing yellow. "What are you doing?" I asked, backing away. On the other side, it was pitch black, but I could feel my way around. The air was stale and smelled like dust. I continued crawling forward, and eventually, I came to a stop. The last thing I remember is his glowing eyes boring into mine. While standing in the kitchen, I reached over and turned off the light. Suddenly, he stopped and stared at me. "Do you really want to know?" he asked. "And you've got quite a few on you, my friend." When the room was plunged into darkness, I noticed something disturbing. A set of eyes seemed to be staring back at me from the hole in the wall, 2 glowing yellow eyes. Within a few minutes, he had made a hole big enough for me to crawl through. "After you," he said, gesturing with his hand. There was a pair of yellow eyes staring back at me, but now I could see more. There were hundreds of eyes, maybe even thousands. All of them were gathered in one place, and it was coming from the center of the wall. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide a hole in my kitchen wall? No, there were big chunks of it throughout the house. For example, there was an entire wall in the living room that was lined with asbestos tiles. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I crept closer and peered into the darkness. Whatever was back there was watching me. Then I slowly approached the wall and peered into the hole. And in the kitchen, the sink was literally attached to an asbestos cement board. Obviously, this was way above my pay grade, so I called in the professionals to deal with it. I wasn't worried at first because according to the inspectors, asbestos only becomes a problem if it's damaged. And then one afternoon, while I was eating lunch in the living room, I heard a strange noise. Someone or something was moving around in the walls. At first I ignored it. Maybe it was just mice or maybe a bird had managed to crawl in somehow. But the noises kept going and they were getting louder. Curiosity got the best of me and I started poking around. As I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear shuffling sounds and what sounded like muffled whispers. I called out, "Hello?" and the voice stopped. I thought I was going crazy. Was it possible that there were people living inside my walls? It took me a couple of days, but eventually I convinced myself that it was just mice. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and went downstairs for a glass of water. When I looked closer, I noticed something odd. There was a slight gap between the counter and the backsplash, about an inch wide. My heart began to race as I realized what I had found. It wasn't until the next day that I discovered why. Screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a chair in my panic. This was insane. I had no choice but to investigate further, so I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. What I saw made my blood run cold. There seemed to be an entrance of some kind, but I couldn't see what it looked like. I had no choice but to call in the professionals once again. He had never seen anything like it before, and neither had I. For a few minutes, I heard scraping sounds, and then everything went silent. Confused, I backed away as he fled in his truck. I was furious. I wanted to know what was behind that wall, but now I would never find out. A week passed, and I still hadn't gotten over what I had seen. It was driving me crazy. When he arrived, I explained what I needed, and he agreed to help. I watched in suspense as he chipped away at the plaster. "Yes," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. He took a deep breath and continued hammering. I hesitated for a moment, but then I crawled through the hole. I turned around and stared back at the opening. It was too small for me to turn around in, which meant I was trapped. I screamed for help, but no one could hear me, and then I heard a voice behind me. "Looking for this?" I froze as the voice approached. "Who's there?" I whispered. "You can call me the collector," the voice replied. I whipped around and saw a tall, thin man standing over me. "How did you get in here?" I stammered. The collector smiled. "Let's just say I have my ways." He picked up a shovel and started digging in the corner. "Just a little home improvement project," he said, without taking his eyes off the shovel. "See, I like to collect eyes." He finally looked up and met my gaze. Before I could react, he lunged forward and clamped a hand over my mouth.